Psalm 2, verse 8, the psalmist writes for God and says, "Ask of me, and I will give you the nations for your inheritance." Yet Paul tells us that he wants our eyes to be opened, that we would enjoy the imbuement of the spirit of wisdom and revelation, so that we will know what God was hoping for when he called you into the kingdom. Not only what he was hoping for, but what are the riches of the glory of his inheritance in the saints. And though the riches of that great inheritance may first land in you as a seedling or some seedlings, he wants by the end of your life that you have contributed significantly to the building of the human soul in grace and faith, the building of society, and the building of godly civilization on the planet Earth. That truly through the salvation of souls, the civilization of societies and civilization itself, we can have goodwill from God and peace on earth that he is the maker of. God's promise is not merely personal blessing, but it is the stewardship of souls, societies, and civilizations. I'm not sure how civilized our country is if it was put to a measuring meter. And nevertheless, contrarily to this mandate, much of today's preaching neglects this sacred mandate. History teaches us that the strongest nations were shaped and formed by the message preached by the Protestant nations in the Protestant Reformation and the Enlightenment. These eras propounded the sacred values, the sacred culture of productivity, justice, equity, and righteousness, to mention a few. The very judgment calls for enduring, lasting nationhood under the auspices of the kingdom of heaven. Another important clarification I want to make before we go further, so that we understand these concepts as we will use some of these terms in our discussion over the months, the years, and hopefully the decades. There's a difference between people and nations. A people are just a gathering, whereas a nation is an aggregation of people around clear-cut value systems institutionalized into regulating society, institutionalized into regulating human relationships, institutionalized into regulating industry, development, education, justice, and the very things we engage in as a people that are becoming a nation. Nations are not soil, but nations are souls that are knit together by their values and their common identity. We have so many identities as a people, as a nation, that we're struggling as 271, close on 400 ethnic nations in Nigeria trying to become one nation. And the first thing we decimate is our education, which is what teaches us our national identity, our national dream, our national vision as to who we are and what we can do together, because we are Nigerians after we are citizens of the kingdom of heaven. And we haven't learned to put in a different priority our ethnicity. It has a priority, but I do not believe it should be superior to our identity as Nigerians. Who are Nigerians? What do we do? What are we like? How cohesive are we? How honest are we? What kind of integrity do we have? The Bible tells us that nations are systems of people, whilst earth is resource inside borders and boundaries of geography. It's important that we understand the difference between nations and earth, between nations and country. A country is a place in which soil there are benefits that accrue for that nation to produce from the earth its prosperity, its commodities, its exports, and the things that help a nation to gain and garner wealth, to create wealth. Whilst the world is systems of nations, the earth is resources embedded for man's discovery and productivity, so that mankind can have what they ought to have. And I believe that we must consider Nigeria to be a very favored nation because the wealth in Nigeria is hardly discovered, it's hardly produced, it's hardly exploited. And yet the exploiters are not necessarily of Nigerian descent. A nation grows formidably when it unites around righteous principles, converting its portion of earth into wealth that she may become a prosperous country and a viable nation under God, a productive nation under God. Having said that, this gospel that we preach is transformative at every level and aspect of humanity. At the level of the individual soul, at the level of a conglomerate of societies, at the level of the nation, at the level of the globe in aggregation. Today, we look at the amazing transformation of Europe and the United States, and then following after them, we look at the transformation of the nations of Asia, of which Japan was a very well-established nation long before Europe became established. The Asians, particularly the Japanese, sent their best analysts into Europe to analyze and to study the cause and effect of Europe's transformation from barbarism into advancement in technology, industry, and serious development. How did Europe and America do it? And now, how did the Asian tigers, the Japanese, the Arabs, the Singaporeans, and the Australians, how did they do it? Reformers were supernaturally raised by God and had huge influence of the gospel in hand to transform the continent of Europe and its isles, and later on the Americas. It began with the Protestant Reformation in the 15th century. That means in the 1400s. And America came on later after the revival and its reformation had taken on significant opportunity on the European continent. The Reformers' successors were known as the Puritans, and they took the initial foundations of the Reformation to another level, and their teaching in Europe and the United States inspired a young man by the name of John Calvin. And Calvin and his cohorts believed in the authority and the inerrance of Scripture, that this Bible that we read was given to us by God as the oracle of God himself. And it comes primarily in two covenants, a covenant called the Old and the covenant called the Church Age. They believed not only in the authority and inerrance of Scriptures, they believed in the disciplined Christian life. And that discipline can only be informed and imbued in man by grace. They believed in the grace of discipline. They believed in the strong moral responsibility of the church to reform not only souls, but also to reform society. They believed in the responsibility of the church to build institutions and institutions of democracy, industry, and market endeavor. It was the message that they preached on the lecterns and pulpits of the church and at rallies, which transformed individual souls, numerous societies, and bequeathed to us Western civilization, the most viable civilization on the earth today. The Bible tells us in Paul's words out of Romans 10 verse 17 that faith comes by hearing, and hearing according to the message of the gospel. It is preachers, therefore, that stand at the door as doorkeepers to a new Nigeria. Preachers, you stand at the door of the beginning of a new Africa. Preachers, we stand at the door of peace on earth and goodwill to all men. Preachers, pastors, teachers, communicators, you stand at the door of a new Africa and a new and better civilization for our people and our posterity. The transformation of our continent is in your hand. You hold the keys. Our people will continue to suffer the belittling of civilization and its tenets as long as we do not take our place as doorkeepers to the kingdom of heaven, making its advent, making its presence, making its precedence on our country's earth and sod. preaches the keys to a better civilization and the keys to transformation of Africa, is here because you occupy over 50% of the populace of this continent. And therefore it is incumbent upon us that we preach and we preach and we preach and preach with passion and conviction that this gospel is the power of God for the deliverance of our continent, our countries, our nations, and our world systems. The Bible tells us in Romans chapter 1 and verse 16 that Paul said, I am not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation. When the gospel is preached with accuracy, it will produce regeneration of the soul, transformation of our societies, civilization of our people groups in our shared endeavors to build a better Nigeria for our children's children and their children, and the children that come after them should Christ tarry in his coming. It is important to know that good preaching or bad preaching is very powerful, and that whatever is preached will shape the culture of those who are the hearers of what is spoken. That is why it is hugely important that we must preach with accuracy, grace through faith. That we may have faith for the vision God lays in the human heart and in the heart of leadership. That we may have grace to be disciplined, to stick with the task at hand. Pass it on as a legacy to our children's children, till like God did with Abraham, the Jewish people remain a nation after millennia have passed since Abraham walked the earth. God chose him because he knew he was a teacher of generations, that he would speak one thing to the generation coming after him, and he was benefited to be able to see his grandchildren, and he taught them to. And the Jews, though they had no country for nearly 2 millennia, they still remained a nation in diaspora. Hear me. It is important to note this, that good preaching is powerful, but we must eject bad preaching by good preaching, so that what people hear shapes their cultural outlook, changes their sense of mandate. The reason why they are here is not to get money. It's to steward wealth so that you can build viable nations and exploit the power embedded in the earth of our countries.